All right, everybody, welcome to Fear and Loving with Ranch, my podcast. It's great to have a lot of my friends here in the roundtable discussion with me this week. We've got Rue Johnson, Ray Kerr, Kayvon Kalabari, and we got Joe Nice over here. And we are, doing this weekly right now. My podcast and myself, we are committed to truth and justice through Gonzo journalism and through bringing in voices of people that are participating in what it is we're talking about. So we're going to have Rue kick us off a little bit, give us an introduction and some words. Thank you, Rue.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Rue Johnson. I am based in Denver, Colorado. My nightlife and music production company is called Rue Black, so that's ROUX Black. We specialize typically in the marketing and working with people, places, and things that want to expand their consumer demographic. So the short version of that is we make shit cool. So in the music industry, when there is a music industry, we work to create campaign development strategies for independent artists and big corporations like Live Nation, like AEG, Red Bull, those kinds of things. And kind of the checks and balances within our company that allows us to have a corporate social responsibility angle is the, I guess, social justice work that we do, and that tends to align itself with the values that I have personally, as well as those that come from the people who are traditionally a part of our constituency. So people who are artists, people who are hellraisers, people who are, fashion designers and creative minds, sex workers, everyone, we tend to have a wide range of people who listen to and participate in what we do across a massive spectrum. And so one thing that has been really instrumental for me lately is making sure that we're mastering the opportunities to amplify the voices of those who aren't necessarily a part of these everyday activist conversations, as well as providing opportunity in general for those voices to spread on their own and their own levels of education and creativity. So we've been doing that lately through the creation of the Denver Creative Industries Alliance. And that is essentially a group of folks who came together and wanted to provide some public statements to city council. And then at some point we'll also go on a state and more federal level to speak about police brutality and the reform that's necessary. So utilizing a lot of skills that I have, moving lots of different people to create avenues of real change for those who haven't traditionally been heard. And I'm excited to be here with y'all on this panel because I have a feeling we're going to talk about some great things. So thank you.
Sounds like some great work. Thank you, Rue. Ray, you can go.
Hi, my name is Ray Kerr. Blessings, Rue. I'm kind of a little awestruck now. I did the second act to that. I graduated from the Vermont Law School about 2.5 weeks ago. I returned to law school after a 17-year bartending career because time was up. I started the fall that the Trump administration began, and it was a project of realizing my potential and taking advantage of what energy I have to commit to the struggle of reshaping a society that has done nothing but try to predate on our flesh. And that is the zeal that I look to start my legal career with. And that's me.
Thanks. Kayvon.
My name is Kayvon Kalabari. First and foremost, I guess I'm a father. This Wednesday, I finalize the adoption on 2 young girls that I've known for their entire lives, and I'm really excited to finally have that done after quite a process that kept me busy during COVID quite a bit, doing all that remotely. I'm an entrepreneur. I own over a dozen businesses across the country, and pizzerias, cannabis restaurants, arts magazine, comedy production, a lot of different things. And that's what I spent the most of my last 10 years on. But what got me into all these businesses was working on drug policy reform. Started back in 2005 here in Denver, working to decriminalize cannabis. And, we did that because at the time, 800,000 people were going to jail every year for simple cannabis possession. Today, it's still 600,000, even though we have this huge, massive corporate industry that's profiting off the legalization of it in various states. And it was being a part of that. I was the CEO for a company that eventually went public, seeing that very extractive capitalism take place right before my eyes showed me that I wanted to remove myself from all of it. And last summer, I removed myself from the cannabis industry and jumped into volunteering my time full time towards shared economy projects, community wealth building. So worker cooperatives and employee-owned businesses. My pizzerias are converting into an employee-owned company. I've also been working on homelessness for a long time. Really, I believe that housing is a human right, and have dedicated a lot of my last 3 to 4 years to that. So a lot of stuff around tiny home villages and truly affordable housing or free housing, homesteading, things like that. That's what I'm dedicating most of my time to these days. But really anything around the human right of not just housing and work, but education and healthy food and healthcare all tie into that, and collaborating with a lot of folks in those spaces as well. So thanks for having me.
All right, Joe.
First of all, Richard, thanks for having me on. I appreciate you. And I'm sure you probably want to be on because of, I guess, some of the work that I've been doing recently with regards to my daily live and direct chat series on Instagram. A bit more about me. I'm an international DJ, played, including the United States. I've now played shows in 48 different countries. Got a master's degree in nonprofit management from the University of Baltimore. Got another master's degree in intercultural services and healthcare from Wake Forest University. I've worked at community centers on the west side of Baltimore. I've worked with refugees here in Baltimore and in Greensboro, North Carolina. Quite honestly, the past few years have been interesting for me because I've just been playing shows and trying to see my daughter, my 9-year-old daughter, as much as I can, and try to live a life of some sort of service and some sort of purpose. And now this COVID-19 pandemic has struck. And the uncertainty is obviously, it's palpable. I feel as if I have more purpose now that I don't know what I'm going to be doing in the next 3 to 6 months than I did when I had shows booked every weekend for the next 3 to 6 months. It's a strange feeling to have, but I feel as if there's, and maybe this is the same for all of you. I feel as if there's there's something bigger for all of us that's more than just being an attorney or being a business owner or being the CEO of an entertainment company or being the CEO of a media organization. And I feel that this momentum, it's something that I've never experienced in my life before. And I'm 44 years old, and it's wonderful to be a part of in however big of a part we play in all of this.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. It's inspiring to have you here with us. I've known some of you for a few years. Some of you I've just kind of gotten to know recently, and others I've known for a very long time. And I can just feel that connection. I'm feeling inspired. So it's been great to bring you together here to discuss topics around the protest movement that we're seeing, but civil rights is obviously at the forefront of that, and to kind of just brainstorm maybe and that's what I think we should all be doing. And then we got to take these ideas and bring them together, and then we collectively need to get these ideas to make the change that we haven't seen in this country in hundreds of years. I think and I do want to shout you out, Joe. I think maybe you might have been my first dubstep show. I've been I don't remember when that was, but I've been dubstep's kind of like my religious music. It's like it really touches me on a spiritual level. So you've kind of you got that pastor feel for me, in terms of that. So,
well, you know what, brother, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm curious to know, was it at Cervantes? Was it at Black Box?
It might have. I know. I live. I think it might have been in New York City.
Then it had to be Dub War, Club Love, New York City.
It was definitely Club Love. Yeah, it was.
Had to be Dub War. Wow. Those were good times, Richard.
I was like 17 or something like that. Yeah.
Those are good times. Those Dub War days. Yeah. Definitely.
Well, I just thought I'd start off with just it's I was just watching 13th the documentary which I somehow I missed. I'm someone that at a young age was incarcerated on drug charges for 20 months, nonviolent, first offense, that kind of thing. And I saw a lot that I never thought I would see through that. And so, you know, and a lot of that had to do with race and had to do with the way that this country's laws have been, you know, it got me thinking, like, where do these laws come from? How are they so dangerous? And like, why were they ever put into place? And so quickly you get the answers to that in this film. And something stuck out for me, and it was just a quote that maybe I'm just gonna throw it out there and see what you guys think about it. But this guy on there in the beginning, he said, "We are the products of the history that our ancestors chose. If we are white, if we are black, we are the products of the history our ancestors did not choose. And yet here we are together, the products of that set of choices. And we have to understand that to escape from it." And, you know, it really hit me hard. It was like, okay, well, that feels like what's been on my mind this week in particular, because it's that escaping from it that we collectively, those of us that don't have our heads up our asses ultimately, or have, you know, the wrong conditioning that is leading us to be hateful. If that's not who you are, then I have a feeling you're probably wondering, how do we get through this? How do we find our way on the other side and, you know, escape from just this history ultimately that has been, that's why they're bringing down the statues, because it was there before there was a country. And it's been there throughout this at least this continent, or this land here in North America. But I mean, it seems to have been, you know, an issue throughout this world, you know, and that being, I suppose, you know, just this prejudice, you know, and the systemic prejudice is kind of where I'm starting to use that word a little more, because in the systemic racism, because I think when it comes to racism and prejudice, it's a whole nother level of thought to try to figure out, how do we get humanity to not think on that level? But it's not that difficult. It's not all that outrageous to think, how do we get our systems of government to not operate through that lens? And I think maybe that's where I wanted to kick it off. And if anyone has any thoughts about that, you know, I think that's what, and then people are saying, oh, protests, well, what are we going to do? We got to bring the protests further. We got to take this to change and make things happen. So yeah, I don't know.
Do you mind if I start this off here?
No, yeah, go ahead.
All right, okay. And again, I just happen to be in this mini library downstairs in the basement, okay? And what I have here is a copy of the United States Constitution, okay? And Richard, you so eloquently stated that you watched the documentary 13 on Netflix. It was adapted from a book by Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow. I've read both the book and watched the documentary. Now, this is the supreme law of the land, the United States Constitution. And there's nothing that benefits Black people in this document until the 13th Amendment. And the 13th Amendment says, hey, you know what? See all you Black people that were picking cotton and picking fruit and vegetables and picking tobacco? You all don't get to do that anymore. You all are no longer slaves. And then we don't get anything again until the 14th Amendment. And this is actually some of it a sham, because it says equal protection under the law. But then if you look at a lot of what Black people had to go through in 1865, 1866, 1867, and 1868 until this amendment was ratified, it eventually said you had vagrancy laws. So if you were standing outside and not working, hey, you're under arrest. Because the 13th Amendment says, hey, you committed a crime, you are now a ward of the state. So you're basically back to some form of slavery. The documentary 13 discusses this, and the book also discusses this. My honest opinion is, see this document here? This document is useless. It's useless. It's really useless. And I think if we're going to start with anything that involves the way criminal justice reform, the legislation and adjudication of crimes, it has to start with a complete reconstruction, and I use that term purposely, a reconstruction of this, the United States Constitution. Because it says right here, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. I don't exactly see that right now with regards to riot police beating the hell out of protesters. Provide for the common defense. We do really well with that because our military budget's out of whack. It's over the top. Promote for the general welfare. Well, wait a minute. Bill Clinton cut the AFDC program. And the Reagan, and if you take a look at the history of nonprofit organizations, Nonprofits, quite honestly, are outsourced government agencies. So essentially, nonprofits pick up the slack where government leaves off. If you look at the history of nonprofits, most of them are about 40 years old. And the reason why is because President Ronald Reagan decided to cut a lot of money for social programs and put that money into policing. Okay, they talked about that on the 13th document also to a certain extent. And then it says here, and to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Okay, great. What does that actually mean when since 1789, Black people haven't really had any of that domestic tranquility, when Black people really haven't been able to acquire the general welfare that, quite honestly, we are entitled to as American citizens, the blessings of liberty. What kind of liberty do Black people actually have when we're constantly under police tyranny? So look, realistically, start with this. You know, get some white out, and look, I just happen to be in an office and I got some white out right here.
Go white out the Constitution.
Just start all over. Start all over.
I mean, I dreamt of it. I've had dreams. I woke up in the night. I've been like, oh, the Constitution's getting messed with and we're fixing it. But then I wake up and I'm like, I think I understand how this politics works and how that document doesn't change. And I find myself, you know, fairly baffled. I mean, it's a corruption of the political process that would lead to, like, I think to myself, like, who is it that could even pick up the whiteout? Like, it's not me. Like, it's not us in this call. Like, how do we see that coming to fruition where we rethink that and we see those changes happen? Because I find myself stuck, you know?
So there's procedure for everything. And what the Constitution represents is a check. It's a check. It's a promise to deliver. And right now, because the organs of government are in capture by agents who do not want that document to realize the ink that sits on top of it, it's a lie. And Joe, you're absolutely right that it is meaningless unless we fulfill the promises outlined in that check, in that contract. Because every single one of you can step into a courtroom tomorrow and hold up that document and say, these are my rights. This is how I want you, government, to respond to those rights. And it's only incumbent on that government to validate those rights. But they're not going to listen to you because you don't hold the capital, you don't hold the power, you don't hold the value to society that this government will move for. And what we're seeing right now with the 70 plus cities uprising, that all power derives from the people. And the truest thing that this country will never lose is the fact that if you can convince a sea change of people to do a thing, that thing will get done. That it doesn't matter if that thing is survivalist camps on the border of the Rio Grande corralling vigilante groups to destroy Mexicans. They'll do it, and the country will validate it. It does not matter if it's a bunch of Southern Baptist preachers aligning with Jewish student groups to march up and down public roads to demand voting access. The country will do it. All power derives from us. And this is a critical moment. We should be asking for the moon. We should be asking for everything, every ounce of ink on that document to be realized. It's a fuck you pay me time right now.
So, I mean, is that what's gonna? I mean, are we gonna see this coalesce into something bigger and bigger, and those voices come together, and there to be organization, and then we're gonna see that fuck you pay me moment, and then we're gonna see that document get rewritten, or like, I guess I'm just trying to foresee what is the goal.
So long as the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania is there, you have a majority of the country aligned against his interests. and a majority of the country willing to grind the wheels of industry to a halt.
I think what's going to be really interesting. I've seen a lot of folks incorrectly compare, all the protests that are going on to what's happened recently in LGBTQ movements or Me Too movements. I mean, those are different for a lot of reasons, but in my eyes, one of the main reasons they're different is those were largely led by white folks. And I think the change was easier. It was way more possible. It was far more attainable readily. And it wasn't baked in, like Joe just mentioned, like Ray just mentioned, into so many other things, right? To turn this around, to turn this tide on racism in this country, we have to look at the fact that, I mean, the massive institutions in our government, but also in capitalism and the corporate space, they have an interest in this racist society that we live in is huge. It is huge. It is trillions of dollars that are put towards military, law enforcement.
Prison industrial complex.
That doesn't go away overnight. And you're going to have, like we've seen it here in Colorado, where, Trump can use this as a benefit to the people that he's trying to get to vote for him, that, we start shutting down these jails, we start shutting down these prisons. A lot of them are in rural communities, that we're losing jobs, and we're devastating small towns, and we're doing all these things. This is about economics at the end of the day. And these things have been built so large that, I mean, honestly, what runs this country at the end of the day? It's money. And this is a centerpiece of that, right? Like the fact that, and this is, my entry into cannabis a long time ago, I mean, immediately opened my eyes into this being obviously a far larger issue than just, hey, I don't want to go to jail for smoking weed. And you start to realize, oh, use is equal across the board, regardless of your race. You have Black and brown folks, depending on where you're at in the country, are arrested, incarcerated, and have sentencing that's 10 to 100 times more severe than that of white folks. Like, this is baked into every part of our system. We're not just going to change the Constitution or change one law here or one law there and expect to see dramatic change. It's going to be this constant shift. And what I'm worried about are these people that are going out and protesting, thinking that somehow that is going to fix things. While it was very necessary to get these protests to get people to listen and to finally, and I advocated for some of the violence, because unfortunately I think you needed that kind of attention to get people to say, oh wait, maybe this is a little different. And that's a whole nother conversation. But shit, it got people to pay attention, and it made this much larger than it was going to be if Donald Trump didn't respond with, wanting to use military force. Now this is something more people can rally around because, oh, Donald Trump hates us, I'm gonna jump on even stronger. This is going to take a very, very long time, and I have to wonder if people are going to, like they have flooded the streets recently, flood the ballot box and flood the elections division with applications to run for office, and to flood city council meetings and legislative hearings and congressional hallways with testimony and with sit-ins and with all this. Just because you protested for 2 days or 10 days out of the year doesn't mean you can take the rest of the year off. And what I'm worried about is that very comfy white folks, as well-intending, as well-meaning as they are, and I'm guilty of this myself, are going to get complacent as soon as this isn't like the big thing anymore. And when that next big thing comes around, is it the second spike of Corona? I don't know. Are we going to remember to push forward? That's what I'm worried about, honestly, because we've had movements like this in the past, right? Like I think Black folks will tell you, in the last 60 years, especially, there's been a lot of these types of moments in history to an extent. Have they, and they have made some change, but have they carried on, right? We've always taken a step back or 2 step backs, I feel like, for every step we've taken forward. And a lot of that's been done in these city council meetings, legislative offices, these people that run government. It's being done in a way that is very quiet, and unfortunately people aren't paying attention. And we need to pay attention in between these very loud moments.
I agree with that. And I really want to say also, first of all, opening this conversation by completely ripping apart the Constitution is exactly the direction that I was hoping this would go. So thank you for that. And just the breadth of the branches of government that are available for us to rip apart on this call with y'all's knowledge is just going to be incredible. So I'm just so blown away. I was like scribbling down notes like a schoolgirl. So what I like Kayvon, I too am concerned that people will at some point become complacent. I think the protests are incredible. And even throughout any of this talking head stuff that I've been doing, interviews or what have you, you know, everyone's like, well, what's next? And what's the thing to do? And, you know, what I've reminded people, and as well had to remind myself, that people are not going to protest forever. They're not going to be out of the Capitol. They're not going to be, you know, in Black Lives Matter Plaza in DC. Forever. And that's because we've seen it happen with Eric Garner. We've seen it happen with Trayvon Martin. The difference now, because of COVID-19, everyone's at home and completely focused on it. You know, Eric Garner said, I can't breathe. And then people were like, should I have to go back to work the next day? Right. So there's not necessarily the continuation of this very public display of using your body as a method of operation when it comes to the protest. Another thing that really sticks out to me, we were talking about Bristol before we started the call, but yes, let's bring down these statues. Let's, you know, do all of these things. But a lot of the protests at this point, because it's gone on so many days, and that sort of monster of complacency is looming, is that we are really like clinging to a lot of these idols and using this sort of, you know, idyllic perspective to think that there is change that's happening. I too believe that we're going to make change legislatively, and at the voting, we have to bring people to the voting box. Like, there's just honestly no other way that we're going to be able to have a powerful voice if we don't translate all of this into who and what we vote for on a local level, all the way up to the president. And so, like, you know, even Black Lives Matter Plaza, I think that it's important to create these like important statements. But one, I remember when saying Black Lives Matter required you to have 25 minutes to argue with the person you said it to, so that you could explain to them that you're not saying that all lives don't matter. I don't even want to have a conversation about all lives matter. If I say Black Lives Matter, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm saying. So by even, you know, I want to be really excited about Black Lives Matter Plaza and the fact that you can see it from space, but in some ways it makes me feel like it's a distraction, and it's one step closer to the complacency that we already know is coming. But then we have that coupled in with other, you know, things like with what happened in Bristol today and in Philadelphia and all these places where they're bringing down all these statues, and, you know, the military taking a stance about the usage of Confederate flags. I mean, all of these things are kind of like in name only, because the systems behind them continue. And I also really feel like in some way, you know, people are using these idols and these kind of these like idol offerings as, you know, we're being pacified. You know, in Colorado, the protests have turned into dance parties, which is like so preposterous to me, because what it did is open the opportunity for comfy white folks to come out and talk about Function One speakers, instead of talking about the fact that this is why we have these massive protests and the systems behind it. So I wanted to just echo that I too believe it's time for us to come up with a very specific political strategy that's going to engage these voices that aren't traditionally heard. And we've got to not be distracted by the shiny lights and the glitter that comes with things like, you know, large art installations in Washington, D.C.
You know what? And it's really interesting that you mentioned that, Ru and Kayvon. And again, I've already been to a few protests over the past few days. Now, again, this is the front of my sign. It says, "We want justice." Okay? That's the front of it. Now, on the back of it, there's an actual specific set of demands. Okay? For example, reparations, Medicare for all, student loan forgiveness, universal basic income, federal job guarantee, postal banking, criminal justice reform, ending the wars. There's probably another 15 points I could have put on here, but it will dramatically reduce the font size, and I want people to actually see what I'm talking about on this sign. And again, much like both everyone's talking about, it's all well and good that we're all in the streets and we're all drinking lemon water and we all got our sunscreen and we all got our cell phones out filming everything and we're taking pictures and we're saying no justice, no peace, no racist police. Or we're borrowing the line from that Master P song, "Don't start no stuff, won't be no stuff." That's all well and good, great. But for as much as we have a social justice activism in the streets, there also has to be an economic portion that works in concert with with all of the footwork literally footwork, people on their feet marching in the streets for justice. You can't have the sort of long-term prosperity that everybody wants in the United States, and quite frankly in other countries around the world, by just saying, hey, no justice, no peace, arrest all the racist police, without an economic plan that involves politics to advance everything forward.
Hey,
But
Richard. Oh, go ahead, Ray.
no, I was going to say that's where this conversation is so important. I'm not in law school to make $1 million suing people left and right for tort liability because they invented the next soda pop that injures everybody that pulls the tab. I'm here to be a public servant until the day that I die, because so much of that ground has been ceded to the people who are comfortable being bureaucrats, passively advancing the buck of white supremacy. Make absolutely no mistake that every single organ of government is fine-tuned to take black flesh and put it behind iron to create green. That's the job. That's what it does. That's what it's been built to do since 1619. And without the pressure from entrepreneurs like yourselves, who are on the ground representing the voices that white folks don't see in the boardrooms, that they don't see in the banks, that they don't see in the lending offices, we don't have a give and take, because there's only so much government can do. And I know that's a tired and hackneyed expression, but for the private sector, for the folks who are running businesses to understand that there is a justice and equity mission associated with participating in the market, you're going to get the government that you deserve with those values.
May I ask a question, Richard, that I think ties into this? Well, so in Denver, we've started to see, and I don't know if this is happening in other cities, I assume it is, some of the people that are kind of running some of the protests and stuff on the ground are splintering, I guess, for lack of a better word. They're starting to get divided up into different political camps and all that. And you know, some of this is done intentionally. Some of this just happens because of ego and other things. Some of it happens naturally, whatever. I don't care if it's this issue or homelessness or what drug policy. I've seen it happen over and over. How do folks that should be leading this, which are members of the African American community, how do they make sure that first that their core doesn't splinter in this conversation? But because when you tie in neoliberal politics and all that, like in Denver, it's crazy. Like we've had 4, 5, or 6, or 7, or 8, or 9 George Floyds in Denver in our current mayor's tenure. He's black. Our city council president was black. There was nothing for those officers except tens of millions of dollars coming out of taxpayer pockets. All right. And now he's saying, oh, I care about this all of a sudden because he's in the face. How do you reconcile one within the African American community alone, but also with the Latinx, Latina communities? Because I've seen a lot of them say, hey, our people have been thrown in cages in Texas now for, you know, years, for decades, and people weren't protesting for us, right? People have been dying, kids have been dying. How do we converge these movements that, you know, unfortunately, all the things that we're talking about, I know they're different, but in a sense, the same systems are controlling that conversation and controlling that money. How do we unite these forces? Because I feel that if you could do that, things would happen a lot quicker.
Interesting. I think the best way to do that is just, you actually, strangely enough, Kayvon, you actually answered your own question. Because again, we're seeing all of these different struggles across the diaspora of people of color, whether it's Black people being incarcerated unfairly and unnecessarily, whether it's our Latinx brothers and sisters on the borders of Texas and Arizona and New Mexico and California being put into cages because they want a better life. I think the easiest way to do this is to find a commonality within the struggle. Because again, it's easy to go ahead and say, okay, hey, you know what? I'm Black and I want reparations. Well, I'm a second generation Mexican and my parents had to cross the border illegally. I want immigrant rights. Again, I think the best way to do that is to find a commonality in the struggle. I mean, I'm currently reading this book right now, From Here to Equality, and it talks about reparations for Black Americans in the United States. And there's loads of literature that will show that Black people and Latinx are lower on the economic tiers of the United States society. I think if we could find a common solution or a common thread or an affinity through economic justice, that I think will advance the social justice movement also. And I think that might be the avenue to take it. Because again, if we're going to just focus on different ethnicities focusing on different issues and not moving in the same direction, then we're going to have a big problem with this momentum breaking apart. There's an old saying, you have to move as a fist, not as fingers. You have to move as a fist, not as fingers. Because if you move as fingers, you're not going to make any sort of impact. If all fingers, and these fingers represent the different ethnicities and the different groups that need something out of this movement, and then we can move together as a fist, we can have more impact. And I think that's what we need to be doing.
Is it a trust issue? Or, I mean, you know, in terms of a lot of my life, my background, like how I perceive protests and how I perceived like that, or when I first got that feeling of like, okay, I see all these issues happening in this country, plaguing so many people, and so many of them are tied together in knots. We see how they're all connected. And I felt like that's the Occupy movement for me. It was a very important part of my life. And I was actually incarcerated, looking out the window, watching people block the street below me, and was just constantly listening to Democracy Now! and the news 24/7 to try to get an understanding of what was happening. And it was inspiring. A lot of people were inspired. There's all, you know, it's not all that different than what we're seeing here. Like, it just built and built. More people stuck around. It was going on for months. There were all kinds of groups with all kinds of wants in terms of social change. But in the end, you look back on it, and historically, it really didn't make, other than to wake some people up, maybe it didn't really have an impact. There wasn't a big change, and there wasn't leadership. There wasn't cohesion. There weren't groups that were actively learning how to operate and work together. And so clearly that's what we need. We got to have these organizations, specifically within the organizations and communities of color, like if they can't decide this is us and this is us and this is us, and they can't figure out some way to communicate together, first of all, let alone work together, then I don't understand how what we're talking about could actually come to fruition. And so is there an issue there? Like how do we get that to happen? I feel like it feels like the first thing we got to have if we, I don't know.
Well, I wanted to just say that I believe that the answer to that is what Ray wrote on his notebook, lead with empathy, the need to understand each other and the need to understand our cultures and the direction of leadership that exists within our culture. So hearing, yes, of course, our Latino people feel like, their kids have been in cages and ICE has been waiting for parents outside of elementary schools and doing a gang of completely heinous shit that is, essentially slave chattel, right? Like they've been doing all the same things. The police have been doing the same things to them. In my mind, I feel like we get together with them by saying, let's dismantle the entire system. Let's dismantle the entire system that also allows for agents to, come and knock on the door of, a 60-year-old grandmother and round up everybody in the house. Let's dismantle that same system that also allows for, uniformed police officers to kneel on a man's neck for 9 minutes. Like, let's, or slam a woman's head on the ground or whatever it is. Let's completely dismantle those systems. And the way that we do that is incrementally getting towards those systems, like starting with, what Kayvon said, like the mayor, and also having to atone with some of the fact that some of the issues we have within the Black community specifically is that we all can't really get on one accord because there's so many like subdivisions of Black people. And we're not a monolith. And I think that's the gift of such a unique and dynamic diaspora, but we also are like very splintered in a lot of ways, so I feel very much like the first thing that's going to have to happen is kind of the coming together of multiple factions within the culture in order to meet like a very specific need. I also think Occupy didn't have any specific like,
well, a lot of them were on his sheet. I mean, the sheet he put up, that Joe put up, I mean, is a lot of the same things that we were sitting in tents fighting, shouting about, and they do affect everyone, you know. And I think as somebody, you know, as I try to like understand, because like, yes, this is vital that we figure out how to get these groups, people of color, to coalesce and to work together. But it's almost even more vital for me as someone. I mean, I'm half Hispanic and half Mexican, but obviously I'm white looking, and that's just the way I identify. And, you know, for me, it's like the work I got to do amongst my people is to figure out how to get them to come together as well around some commonalities, you know. And I guess it's just I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I just feel like it's about policing equality. It's about like you know, this racism within the criminal justice system. But it seems like it's just the onion just starts to unpeel towards like a country that is full of like rampant in corruption and completely owned by forces like Ray was mentioning, and powers that are generally are white. And so it's like we can talk about abolishing you know, the police or reforming these systems on a local level, and that's what we have to do right now. But it's like I'm fearful of, and I'm cognizant of, and I'd like to see us fight now and really not give up the fight until we can live in a land where that white power is not absolute anymore, because it has all the money and all the means, and it tends to just push everything out of the way.
The first thing they teach you in policy school is never to squander a good crisis. And so when you look at the different punctuated changes in policy and the law, you see moments of great national strife where the access to your civil liberties is pushed forward. It's no accident that Chief Justice Warren took the 1960s as an opportunity to blow a giant ring around what the Fourth Amendment allows the police to do. That's when you got Miranda rights. That's when you got rights to a lawyer. Public defender offices did not exist before the 1960s. So can you imagine just how unjust access to the criminal system was without an attorney? You had railroads. It's how you got 9-year-olds in front of a all-white 12-man jury in the middle of Birmingham, Alabama, to string up a child from a poplar tree under color of state law. Okay? So this is an opportunity. To answer questions about OWS was a pamphlet. It was an opportunity for everybody to get on the same page, to understand exactly what the stakes were. Everybody that was in the Boston encampment from OWS that I got down with, they used that as a launch pad to say, nah, I'm not just going to join the rat race and try and get the most comfort, because the most comfort can just as easily be ripped away from me, just like my parents. Black home ownership took a nosedive between 2009 and 2015. And by no accident, it was by design. It was an opportunity to dangle the prospect of the American dream in front of people that were thirsty for it, and then just as promptly rip it away with some clever covenants in a contract. So you're asking me what happened to OWS? Salt in the wounds, and people got hip to it. It wasn't going to happen any other way. It sure as hell wasn't happening from the 04 RNC riots. It sure as hell wasn't happening watching kids that you went to high school with come back with 1 or 2 fewer limbs. It sure as shit wasn't going to happen watching your public school consolidate with the other local small city because they didn't want to fund teachers. They wanted to buy an SRAM freaking anti-terrorist tank for your local city so that your cops could have riot gear. I mean, it's no accident that we can't afford PPE for our hospitals while Halliburton or United Defense or Smith & Wesson outfits the the Hartford police, the Portland police, the Boston police. They have fucking helicopters. What the hell do they need helicopters for policing a city of less than 1 million? You don't need a helicopter. Sorry, bro. Give it to the hospital. You don't need it. So you want to talk about where we are? You want to talk about how to unify around different nodes of the same fight? It's right there in front of you. If you can't see where you stand in this crisis, then you can't learn. You're not going to be able to understand why or how to swim. It's like trying to force a donkey to eat. You're not going to be able to do it.
I think and the reason I asked the question was obviously the theory around all of this is quite simple, right? That these systems are collectively suppressing lots and lots of people, but practically, how do folks on the ground, acknowledge that and get over tiny differences along the way and not let these little differences, these little disputes or conflicts, this moment of a raised voice, how do they not let that get in the way of the bigger picture like it does over and over? And I agree, you guys both mentioned, all you mentioned, the monetary aspect of it. And I mentioned earlier how tied in the private spaces into all this and city budgets. We've seen all the charts about how, cities and states spend like egregiously more on law enforcement and incarceration than they do on education, healthcare, all this public health and safety combined. I mean, that probably is the best thing that we can all agree on, right? Is once we do defund these things that are holding us down and honestly creating a need for money, more money in all these other social services, right? This thought of harm reduction, if we can move this money into the places where we do need it, education and healthcare. I mean, it's sitting right in front of us. That money is right there on the table. We simply have to choose to allocate it differently. That's where I get into people thinking about being involved in this process outside of just these protests. Like, get to know how your city and state governments work. Because man, when you see how corrupt and the disparity that exists in how these monies are spent, like it's so black and white, to know that we are doing things in a manner that doesn't make any sense.
It makes me think, because I've witnessed a few different people close to me and friends and people I've known in my life go from working a job not in politics to realizing that they were passionate and going out there and doing what you're talking about, Kayvon, and giving it a shot, and now they are actual representatives, or they got one being Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I went to school with her, and we were in political discourse class, and I just never forgot her. And then one day I woke up, I'm like, what the fuck is it? Like, what is she doing on CNN? And like, just that story is obviously just like put a lot of like flames and like to my fire, and made me realize, like, if I feel ready, and that, because you better feel ready, because this is like it's your whole life that you're signing up for, especially if you're going to be a non-corrupt politician, because there's two different ones. Most of them are corrupt. They play the game in the corrupt way. That's how you win. That's how you keep your job. So if I wanted to get into it, I want to be a non-corrupt politician. We can just call it that. I mean, and in doing that, you better be ready to put your money where, or to just stand up and do it. So I don't know. What do you? I kind of lost my train of thought. I was feeling a lot of feelings there, but I don't know. What were you talking about, Kayvon? I gotta say, because I want to get it back here.
No, I was just agreeing that the money's at the center of this, and I think if all these different groups that are trying to accomplish the same thing, but in different ways sometimes, that if they can coalesce around the fact that we should be spending all of this taxpayer money and all these taxes and all of this, I mean, we are the richest nation in the world, and we have very little to show for it, right? Like it is sad. It is sad how much resources we have and how little we have to show for it. And I think people just need to get hip to that. and understand that it is all very possible. It's simply a matter of priority. And unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to get there unless people stay engaged once this protest is over. So
Yeah, I wanted to also say around that same line, Kayvon, that like there is a lot of infighting in the movement, and I say that as someone, I'm kind of an outlier of the movement. Like there are people who I know who spend like, you know, all of their time as a quote activist. They check all the activist boxes. They're the ones who look like activists, you know, whatever. And then, you know, me, I tend to use my visibility a lot just as a way of like blowing up an issue that we find to be important. And I don't necessarily need to like jostle with the activist folks to have a voice. But even with like, so the infighting, to speak to the infighting, the creation of, we created this alliance essentially, right? Which is like all these various creative people who are coming together. We made quote recommendations, because that's like, you know, the cannabis term for like, we want you to listen to what we have to say. And what I, even in the conversation with a lot of these people, there's some stuff that we recommended that is not necessarily on my personal agenda of activism, right? Like I don't necessarily like think that we should have interactions with the police. I think that we should completely defund the police, abolish the police, and all those things. But even within that, there were people who found that it is important to say that, you know, police officers should like kneel to the protesters in lieu of like beating them over the head with batons, right? And so I'm like, okay, cool, that's an action thing that can be done. I don't necessarily need the police to kneel. I don't think they need to kneel before us in order for that to not be a thing, you know? But I also think that it's important to know when to fight your battles and what's a bigger part of for the greater good. And I think that many movements, maybe, you know, big ones, small ones, ones that will happen after the protest is over or whatever, should really try to focus on like tangible items that are useful and doable and workable, and ones we can be held accountable on, instead of, you know, having so much infighting about like, well, you know, I think we should start with universal basic income first, or, you know, I think whatever. It's like, listen, if we're going to dismantle these systems, we have to get on one accord. And just because I personally don't need the police to kneel before me, that doesn't mean that others who will come within the movement won't find it important. And also, that's how you build alliances. So I just wanted to say there's a gang of infighting that's always happening, and that I don't want that to ever I don't want that to destroy this movement, because we have such a strong, you know, connection right now, I feel like, all over the world. But even within it, we're seeing some of this infighting too. So, Joe, were you gonna say something, Joe? Oh, okay.
Well,
No. I mean, Ru, I had nothing to add. I had nothing to add. I had nothing. No, I'm just sitting back. I'm cold chilling, just like I said before the call started off. Cold chilling.
Well, it makes me think
And I'm
about
agreeing with you, because again, all of these tangibles that I keep talking about is also what we should be fighting for.
it's just, I just get I can't get the word, you know, in being someone that wants to see that list enacted, and I want to see this pain healed, and I always have my whole life. It's just like embedded in my heart. And being that way, it's just I've been trying to use my reasoning. It's like, what is in the way? Like, what are these forces that are in the way? And when it comes to all these things we want to see happen, like, I would be stoked to see these mayors and these governors like just listening and being like, we're doing it, we're making change happen, because they're afraid for their jobs, whatever it is. But I feel like Kayvon said, like, it is about going and putting in representatives that will work for those things, and it's about votes actually happening and on policies, and if we can get all that to happen, then we can start to unravel this thing. And so it's just figuring out who those leaders are, and who can we trust to not be corrupt, and who can we trust to represent us properly. And that's a group that I've been pretty excited about the past year, called Represent Us. And it's just like an organization that has like a lot of communication with each other all over the country. And it's about supporting these local leaders that are committed to fighting corruption. And in the end, like, we need laws too. In addition to all the other things we need some legislation that is anti-corruption. Because if we don't have it in the law that we don't have corrupt government here, then isn't it going to just persist? And if it persists, how are we going to have the people who want to see the police departments change? How are those those needs and those wants and the majority's voice, how is that going to translate through our representatives and into the policy changes if we can't trust that it's not a corrupt system to begin with? And yeah, go ahead, Ray.
You know,
Go for it, Joe. Go
all
for it,
right,
Joe.
all right, but thank you. Kayvon, you said, hey, look, we need people that represent us. Ray, you said, look, Ray, you essentially alluded to a representative government. Okay, and again, I go back to my sign, my handy sign that I'm walking up and down Monument Street with, in Charles Street and St. Paul Streets with in downtown Baltimore. Another line item that I think clearly will address some of your points, Richard, is getting money out of politics. Because getting money out of politics, because lobbying is legalized bribery. That's exactly what it is. I mean, let's call it for what it is. Lobbying is legalized bribery. So again, if you have politicians who are on the take, who are controlled by big corporations such as big oil, the tobacco lobby, big sugar, the fossil fuel industry, the military industrial complex, there's no incentive for our public servants to do what they are asked to do based upon a representative government. And again, our public servants are tasked to do the greatest number of good for the greatest number of people. That's exactly what they're supposed to be doing. So the representative for us is supposed to be working for the body politic, not the 1% or the special interest groups. So I think if we're going to start with any sort of legislation and baked into that legislation is anti-corruption, I think we have to get rid of the corruption that is part of the legislative process in the first place. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to get money out of politics. Another line item that I should be putting on my side is having what's called ranked choice voting. So instead of having a voting system where you say, well, hey, you know what? You're a Democrat and I don't like you. Well, you're a Republican and I don't like you. Well, Joe Biden grabs women's breasts. Well, Donald Trump has sexually assaulted women. Well, Joe Biden can't talk. Donald Trump has bad hair. None of that is a policy. And that's the kind of bullshit that you see in every single election. It's this consistent and constant character assassination of people instead of having issues and policies that people actually want to debate and discuss for the betterment of the United States body politic. So again, ranked choice voting. So again, with ranked choice voting, you actually vote for a particular issue, not necessarily for a particular party. So again, if that's the case, you're now more incentivized to vote for a particular issue rather than a particular person because they have nice hair or they have nice teeth or they have the most money to put up the most signs in your neighborhood. Ranked choice, again, if we're talking about completely transforming everything, we got to, and again, I mentioned when I first part of this is this lovely document, okay? And Ray, you mentioned a representative government. The last time I checked, all of these people at the bottom of this who signed their names to this, they were all really rich white guys and most of them were slave owners. There weren't any black people involved in any of this at all, which is exactly why black people didn't get shit until the 13th Amendment. So again, if we're talking about if we're talking about laws, and Kayvon, you mentioned representatives, and Ray, you talked about a representative government. Let's start here, and let's get representatives who represent the actual Constitution, the makeup of the United States, to rewrite the Constitution.
Can I just ask a question really quick? I know we're going to Ray, but are you saying ranked choice voting or red choice voting?
Ranked, R-A-N-K-E-D.
Essentially, you could vote for 3 candidates in theory and say, I want to give 3 points to number 1 and 2 points to number 2 and 1 point to number 3. So you're getting, in theory, at the end of the day, the candidate that the most people can work with or tolerate, as opposed to having these 2 extremes that Joe was talking about, where it's all or nothing. You get to rank people. In Denver, and our mayor currently in his 3rd term, in our primary election, he got about 30% or less of the primary vote, and he ended up winning, right? He was 30% of somebody's choice and probably nobody's second. So there probably would have been a different outcome in Denver's last election had we had ranked choice voting. Aurora and Denver are both, just so we know, pushing that via ballot initiative. Most likely, it got pushed from this year. Most likely next year.
The only people that benefit from the winner take all model of voting are people who can, as Joe keeps chiding, pay for the bribes. Maine operates on a ranked choice voting system. It did produce Governor LePage. For those of you who are aware of who Governor LePage was, he was basically the North Country Trump before Trump ran for office. And then he jogged off to Florida after he was done with Maine. So there are, it's not a tonic, it's not a cure-all, but what you do get are folks who are more committed to putting up their list of agenda items rather than just being, hey, I'm on Team Blue, vote for Team Blue, to hell with Team Red. And I want to circle back to Richard's question, who's in the way? Well, I mean, I think that's incumbent on all of us to really understand who the dark force, not dark force, but that kind of dark energy, that the force behind the inertia that constrain all of our civil liberties, are quiet enjoyment of being American. And, you know, you can look to folks like Koch Industries, you can look to folks like Mercer, you can look to Eric Prinz and you know, the weapons manufacturers at Raytheon, you can look to Bank of America and Wells Fargo. These are the people who benefit the most from the really narrow definition of what public corruption is. They can show up on K Street, say, I got $150,000 that I want to go to this one person because I know that they're going to be the swing vote. Oh, and by the way, I have that $150,000 multiplied 50 times just to make certain that I don't have to pay taxes. Amazon paid less taxes than everybody on this call combined. Like, these are the people that are in your way. And it occurred to me that our greatest strength, at least generationally, our greatest strength is our disillusionment. It's the fact that we're not going to get some savior on a white horse to come, you know, sing us a walking folk tunes, and then we're going to storm the Capitol and get what we want. It has to come from us, because at this current rate of self-destruction, because we've ceded so much authority, because we've ceded so much capital to the titans of industry, this is going to kill us. Full stop. Whether we cook ourselves or whether we police ourselves to death, our system is going to kill us. And the more we key in on that fact, on that urgency, that every one of us here has somebody in the single digits that we love full bore. That person isn't going to have a future if we continue to fail at disrupting the system.
That's so sobering. I feel like that's just like, yeah, so sobering. Absolutely. Kayvon?
You know,
Make us feel better. I mean, it's doom and gloom, but you know what? I think we have to recognize that it's doom and gloom. Otherwise, we're going to go back to, you know, whatever people are going to be doing after the protest. They're going to get the coronavirus. They're going to go back to work, whatever. You know, if we paint this, like, you know, beautiful picture of that things are going to somehow change because people did storm the Capitol, then we are sadly mistaken.
Look, I'm Haitian. Every generation has seen an existential threat. Every generation of my island has seen America send their foot soldiers to rape, pillage, and tell us to be good little niggers or we're going to bomb you to holy shit. And nevertheless, Black mothers continue to raise Black babies into a society that wants to eat their flesh. My wife is due for our first in 2.5 weeks.
Wow.
Nevertheless, you have to have hope, because the last thing that you'll ever lose in life is your hope. Hope is gone. You've given up. I know how hard the test is before us, and I know that we are capable of rising to the challenge.
Yeah, I don't think it's doom and gloom at all. I know it feels that way a lot of the times, especially when you tuck something like this in with a pandemic. Like, people are people are struggling with their sanity right now. But as much as we chide and hate social media for a lot of things and a lot of reasons, and the internet, how detrimental it is in so many ways, man, it is a way for us to share experiences and to disseminate information in such an efficient manner. I take a look at what's happening right now in these other countries, whether they're tipping over statues or whatever. I'm looking at the fact that you have people of color from around the world saying, jumping on this thing that happened in Minneapolis, this fire that started. You couldn't have seen that kind of growth happen so quickly if this was 5, 6, 7 decades ago. Now, what do we do with it? Do we do something positive with it and actually grow it into something that can affect change? I think that's yet to be seen. But the potential, the resources, the infrastructure that I think we need to make that change has never been more available and at our ready than it is right now. And I hope people acknowledge that when they're out there. It's pretty amazing seeing, this always comes into my mind, the image of the Hong Kong protester, and they've got all their garb on and saying like what they use it for. Like it's nice that that's not the right word, but the fact that that kind of information is getting spread both ways in how you interact with these very police states is intriguing and exciting and interesting. I think we have the ability to be very effective in our tactics as people that are pushing back on this very corrupt and broken system.
I think about the civil rights movement. I mean, I've been, thinking about it for a very long time, and just that period of the 60s and revolution and the protests and maybe the impact that was had. Obviously, there wasn't nearly as much impact as probably that was needed. But they didn't have these tools by any means. I mean, and they were able to get a lot accomplished. They were able to organize in big ways and see the Civil Rights Act, that kind of thing, and initiated. And in terms of today, it's like, yeah, I think it's just having a different perspective on these tools, specifically social media and the web, and if we can perceive them as beneficial, and then we can use them as tools to commit positive change, then they will be. But so I think it's just like helping everyone see that this isn't this detrimental, danger, messed up thing that you're constantly being like traumatized by. And even though maybe it is, but it's not just that, and it can be more. And that's how I use it. And I have a feeling that I know that's how all of you guys use it as well. And I think it's not to be understated. And we mentioned complacency, we mentioned urgency in the context of how do we keep this going and how do we get people to stay making things happen, not just protest and then fall out. And I think that there's a level of urgency that was not had in these protest movements in the past. And in terms of that complacency, not falling prey to that, I think it's about hammering away at this urgency. I mean, we're not going to even really have to try. I think there's just an urgency that has never been had before. So I guess I just am optimistic that there's
the organ grinder of the 40-hour.
What was that?
The organ grinder of the 40-hour work week is lifted. We're looking for why this has gone much differently than the Freddie Gray uprising, why it's gone much different than the Mike Brown uprising. Nobody has to go back to work because nobody can, because the government is trying to do the right thing with UI benefits, and folks are coming away with $400, $600, $800 a week. That's insane. That's above the wages that they otherwise would be earning at minimum wage rates. And that's phenomenal. And that's exactly what would have happened if a UBI was instituted on January 19, 2017. you think that people who have to work have time to throw bricks to burn down the shop that they depend on to put bread on the table? Absolutely not. No, this uprising will last as long as UI checks continue to go out and pandemic lockdowns prevent folks from being in their shoulder-to-shoulder warehouses or what have you. And this was a long time coming. I mean, every society reaches that breaking point.
I hope people see that this is their job. Like they come out of, I think, you didn't really know what your direction was, especially people, millennials. You haven't really had a job that you've cared about. You haven't really had a passion that translated and you're feeling something different than you ever have right now. And you will all summer. And so how does somebody just drop that? I mean, I could see that persisting. I'm hopeful that this becomes a lifestyle, I did have one thing I wanted to mention before we kind of wrapped up. Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had one thing I wanted to mention. And again, there's so much energy and fervor and just excitement about what is happening right now. But again, so much, and I mentioned this in another conversation I had with my friend Catherine, and we videotaped and it's online now. There are 4 fights that Black people have had to fight for 400 years. The fight for humanity, the fight for freedom, the fight for equality, and the fight for survival, right? Freedom, humanity, equality, survival. Black people have had to deal with this for 400 years. White people have had to deal with these 4 fights for about 90 days. And white people are like, what the fuck? Is this really how Black people have to deal with life on a day-to-day basis? Shit, I did have a job. How am I gonna pay my rent? Wait a minute, I'm sick. Am I gonna have health care? What do you mean I can't go outside? And wait a minute, when I do go outside, I gotta wear a mask? And now you see, those are the 4 fights that white people had to deal with. In terms of Black people, at one point, Black people had to fight to prove that we were human beings. At one point, Black people were property, no different than my cell phone, my pen, or this glass of water that I'm drinking. At one point, Black people had to fight for freedom, 13th Amendment. At one point, Black people had to fight to be equal, civil rights. Now, Black people had to fight for survival because of the pandemic and wealth inequality. White people have those same fights, but on a much lesser intensity. So that is the big reason why there are so many more people in the street, and why about 30 minutes ago, Kayvon, you said, well, how do we get everybody together? And my answer was, hey, we have to find a commonality in the struggle. White people are saying, shit, this is really how Black people live on a day-to-day basis. This really is how Black life is actually taking place for the overwhelming majority of African Americans in the United States. People are realizing it, and people are seeing it. And white people now are saying, well, wait a minute, I'm used to seeing Black people getting fucked up at a protest, but wait a minute, a 75-year-old man got shoved to the ground and started bleeding from his ear. That's bullshit. We're not going to stand for that. And wait a minute, a white woman got shot in her eye with a rubber bullet and lost her sight. Well, Black people have had fire hoses and tear gas and belly clubs thrown our way for generations. And white people are now like, wait a minute, I don't like this. But the problem is that white people can't go to their manager and have this situation taken care of. Okay? All the Karens that are out there can't say, wait a minute, I want to talk to your manager because I don't like the way I'm being treated. No, the cops are fucking you up just as, if your name's Steve or Chad, they're fucking you up just as easily as if your name was Jamal or Lakeisha. Doesn't make a damn bit of difference. So that's exactly why there's so many white people joining in this movement. And there's a whole lot of people that are literally saying, yeah, you know what? Black lives matter, because you know what? Black people did build this country. Black people did build a majority of these Ivy League institutions. You'll learn more about that in this book here. White people are understanding that, you know what? This inequality is really bullshit. And I'm a victim of this inequality to a certain extent. And I don't like it. And I want to do something about it. So I want to stand with my Black brothers and sisters. I want to stand with my Latinx brothers and sisters. You know what? Shit, I want to stand with the Jewish community. I get it, because there are human rights violations taking place around the world. And again, you don't want to co-opt this movement, but again, we have to move as a fist, not as fingers. And I hope that everybody who eventually watches this understands that concept. It's not fingers, it's a fist. And we have to move as a fist in the same direction.
So I don't want us to have to stay do this all night. So I'm gonna kind of like move us into some closing statements and to have everyone speak on any groups that they wanna support. I did have one last thought that I've been thinking about since I heard about this earlier in the week, and I've been thinking about this for years. I happened to make like kind of a fake Facebook event about 5 or 6 years ago. I remember the day doing it where I made a Facebook event for a March on Washington to be like 2.0 from the one then. And it's just funny. It's just been sitting there. Nobody knows about it. And now I'm kind of changing the wording because there's apparently, from what I'm hearing, an actual March on Washington being planned for the anniversary, March on Washington for Federal Policing Equality Act. I guess that's where Sharpton and the family of Floyd came up with that. And I think that's what we're rolling with. So in my mind, I don't think they're going to call it something else. I don't think there's going to be another one. I think that's going to be the one. And there's a lot of time between now and then. And I don't see this stopping between now and then. And I think maybe that's the period of time we had to figure this out, because the history of that march, which not many people knew, I was like, how the fuck did this march even happen? And they had religious groups, all kinds of political groups, not just groups of people of color. And they all decided, we're going to speak to the government. We're going to tell them we need this thing set up. And they made it happen. And then they had those opportunities for those speeches. And then that changed the game. So I think we're going to see I'm hopeful we see a game change then. And if anyone has anything to say about that, that'd be great. And then we can wrap up.
Yeah, I think it just speaks to the need to continue the momentum. And I think that many people like to have some sort of, deadline or like something tangible that they're working towards, so they can feel like, okay, by this amount of time, I want to, see change, or hopefully there'll be change, or when we get to that level, there will be change. So, milestones are very important. I do hope that this March on Washington does happen and that it does allow folks to continue to put their energy somewhere. But in the meantime, more than, the fanfare of the protests and, when the cameras shut off, or when they're not as hyper focused on, what exactly is happening in whomever's city, or when people stop, marching on City Hall, I hope that we are continually engaged in our systems of government, particularly around voting and, really showing up to so much of these city systems, because that's really how things get changed. So that's really where I believe our main focus should be as we're going forward in the process.
All right. Well, if no one else wants to speak on that, maybe Rue, you can go ahead and we'll start with you, and maybe anything you want to say to end off this conversation, and any groups or anything that our viewers should check out after this. Or
Yeah, I mean, I donated to the Colorado Freedom Fund, and also the Minnesota Bail Fund as well. I think those things are important because that's how, the protesters in Denver, I think they get like a $999 fine or something to that effect. So I find those things to be very important. I just loved this conversation so much because I think that I learned a lot, and it also helps me to compartmentalize so many parts of the movement into various, kind of workable bites, so to speak. So I always, of course, am shouting out Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter 5280 if people are looking for something that is like local in Denver to donate to. And just in general, thank you, Rich, for bringing us all together. And I'm blown away by this conversation and really inspired. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, Ray.
Yeah, give yourself an action plan. I've got one pre-baked from our Rutland area local chapter of the NAACP. First, figure out which organization you want to help support, because as we said today, if it's not green, it's not going to get done. Number two, be hip to what's going on in your state legislature. Be hip to what's going on in your city select board. Be hip to who your public representatives are. Know what they stand for. Know what their connections are. These aren't people who are very sophisticated in how they respond to the biggest wallet in the room. They're pretty flagrant. They're very high profile about it. Hold them to task for it. Number four, pay for your local press. If you're not supporting your local journalist, you're not going to know what's happening in your backyard. And you kind of deserve to be bamboozled if you're not going to support the people around you trying to tell you the truth. And number six, find a way off of the social media, find a way outside. There's nothing better for your mental health than to be able to get some fresh sunshine, whether that's, sunshine in one of the parks, sunshine on a how do you call it, forest trail. Get yourself outside, take care of yourself, and keep hope alive.
Thank you. Kayvon.
I would say I'm a proud unaffiliated. I've never been affiliated with the party. I don't think I ever will. And to Joe's sign and a lot of other issues that need to be fixed, I guess I hope that people, even you don't need to latch on to a group that just popped up, in light of the things that are happening now. There are so many organizations, people, things, movements that are working on those things on Joe's sign. If you're passionate about those, latch onto those, but also understand how marginalized communities are probably impacted even more so by that than you are. I assume it's mainly white people listening, as you said, and understand the intersecting nature of all those issues and be willing to collaborate and work with those folks. I see division too much in issues where everybody agrees, but they're fighting for dollars or they're fighting for attention. And that just can't happen anymore. And yet you have to, if you care about healthcare, you should also give a lot of care about substance abuse and mental health and recidivism rates and, all of these things. These are all tied together. So just open your minds to that. And then don't expect perfection and don't get frustrated and disengaged when it doesn't happen the way that you want it to, because it's never going to happen the way that we want it to. But we can move into a better plane, into a better space. We can push things forward in a better place than they are right now. And I guess last two bits would be, don't listen to talking points. Ray kind of touched on that. We're going to have a lot of politicians this year, next year, talk about all the things that have happened in the last 3 months and boil them down into talking points. But look at their histories and what have they done. Joe Biden's a great example of that. He's going to talk about this to no end, and he has one of the worst records when it comes to doing anything to help out Black folks in this country in any of the positions that he's been in. He's no more worthy of that position than Donald Trump, in my opinion, and that's a sad state of affairs when those are two choices. And the last is let young people lead. Listen to them and let them move, because I got to tell you, having a 9 and a 13-year-old girls, they know a hell of a lot more than I do about a whole lot of things that go on in this world, and it behooves us to listen to young people more.
Amazing. Thank you.
You know what, Kayvon, and I also have a 9-year-old daughter. I'm about to FaceTime her when we're done all of this. I know, and first of all, Richard, thank you for thinking enough of me to be involved with everyone here. I appreciate you, and I appreciate everyone here, everyone that's decided to participate in this on a Sunday night, on a Sunday evening. And I hope we get to do this again next Sunday, like church. So I'm good with that. I'm good with that. And I guess the common theme there, the common phrase that we keep hearing is, hey, let's have the conversation. Let's have the conversation. Let's talk about it. But I think people forget how to actually have a conversation with somebody. And again, what I want to make sure that everybody understands is there's a way to have a conversation. And the 3 words that I want to make sure everybody understands, and we're eventually going to watch this, is to connect, collect, and direct. So you find a connection with somebody who you maybe you're in opposition with. Say, hey, look, you know what? I don't understand what's going on, but let's talk about this. Let's find some common connection within the struggle. It goes back to Kayvon, what we were talking about in terms of finding a commonality in the struggle. Then you collect information about the person you're trying to have that conversation with, or you're in some sort of discourse with. You're Latino and you have brothers and sisters being caged up. Well, wait a minute, I'm Black and I've got brothers and sisters being caged up. wait a minute, maybe we can work together. And then direct. Find out direct your intentions to that other person or that other party. And I'm sure they will be much more receptive to working with you and having some sort of effective dialogue with you than just saying, hey, look, this is what I want, this is what I need, and I don't give a shit about what anyone else thinks about. So again, conversation and communication. Communication is the transfer of meaning and understanding of meaning. It's the transfer of meaning and understanding of meaning. And the more we are able to collect, connect, and direct with that understanding of communication, I think we'll be better able to have the sort of political discourse that's necessary to move our country forward. Lastly, again, because I'm in Baltimore and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, otherwise known as the NAACP, is in Baltimore, that is the organization I think we all should be going ahead and support.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. I'm going to read one of my poems real quick to end this off like I always do. And we absolutely, I did this last week with an amazing group, and I'm thinking, if you've been on here, you enjoy yourself, I might as well invite you to the next one. We can have more than 5 people on here, I guess. So this poem's called If You Think You Can, You Can. Wandering around these unhinged streets with some qualms in my pocket, when will this ink wash out? And why are they all so sick? I had to reassemble recently. Sometimes it's all just a shambles. Our social status ain't too pretty, cracks in self-worth, gaps in empathy. And if we think we can't, we can't. And if we think we can, we can. And if you think you can't, you can't. And if you think you can, you can. All that searching and networking, you had better make a plan to change the fabric of your own and make it manifest, man. Seen this old friend living on the street. He's out of options, an addict for hire. I always have $5 for him, happy that his life hasn't expired. And if you think we can't, we can't. And if you think we can, we can. And if you think you can't, you can't. And if you think you can, you can. We rap about addiction like it's Vietnam, no family untouched, a draft in full effect. We need to rethink this war because the whole system is suspect. What price is paid for our ideals, capital and tradition and possession, resisting revolutions just to stay this way? Disassociation is the sad obsession. And if we think we can't, we can. And if we think we can, we can. And if you think you can't, you can't. And if you think you can, you can. You can, you can, you can, you can. And if you think you can, you can. Let's get done. Yes.
That's so good.
I hope you guys have a great rest of your Sunday night. And thank you all so much. I had a great time. I just get so excited doing this. So we'll do it again.
Ray and Joe, love your minds. Rue, I'm pissed we're in the same city. We don't see each other more. So let's get it on the books.
I'll fix that, I promise. You guys are awesome. Finding everyone on the internet to follow you all. So.
You know what? Why don't we put all our information in the chat? That way everybody can get to it.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yes, good idea.
I have a good idea every once in a while.
Yeah.
You had a couple.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's a pleasure to be in such company.
I do miss sound systems in dubstep, Joe.
And you know what? And I'm itching to have a power mix real quick. Right now I can't even get myself to a place where I can get psyched up to play music in front of a room of people. I can't even do that at this point.
You guys got to check Joe out. It's on Unreal DJ experience right there.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, should we follow your Instagram for your SoundCloud or something?
I'm putting all of that in there right now.
Yes.
All of that in there right now. That way it's nice and
What's
easy.
the handle, Joe?
Joe Nice DJ. I'm typing it up right now.
Yep.
Because, I like being efficient.
Look it up. There's a few Joe Nices out there. So
There's only one Joe Nice, brother. You know what it is.
good response.